Chapter 39. The rest of the trip was almost a blur for Jason. Mickey was certainly aware Jason was glad to be there with her in Las Vegas, but she could also tell he looked forward to getting back to the office. Having been married for quite some time now to a guy whose work involved government secrets, she was well aware there were some matters he just couldn't discuss with her. It all had to do with national security, but she couldn't imagine what that could possibly be in such a little town as Sonora in Northern California. While Jason was lost in his own daydream, something that was happening regularly now after their amazing night in Las Vegas, Mickey thought of one time when she and Jason had gone to a party, and apparently some of the people he worked with were also there. She remembered this one clean-cut guy who struck up a casual conversation with her that naturally ebbed and flowed. At one point during the conversation, they started talking about work. He started out asking her what she did, volunteered his occupation, then asked her what her husband did for a living. She naturally responded like she always did, with the truth. Barely nodding her head and speaking slowly, she simply said, "I have no idea." What struck her was his response. He smiled, saying, "Good answer." Mickey recalled being quite taken aback by his response. It took a while for her to realize the whole conversation had actually been an artfully crafted test to see if Jason was successfully keeping secrets he was supposed to keep. Initially, she was mad that this guy's interest in her wasn't to enjoy a conversation, but rather to test her husband, without his knowledge either. Yep, she had felt just plain used. Mickey finally realized this guy wasn't there socially. He was just doing his job. Not only was he doing his job, he was sacrificing his social life that evening to make it possible for people to live in this country like they do. Sure, the country wasn't perfect. It had its problems. But it was better than a lot of places in the world. In the end, she decided to forgive her unknown interrogator, allowing him a place in her memory reserved for those she appreciated. While driving back from Las Vegas, Jason was busy with thoughts of his own. He couldn't wait to get back and talk to Dennis. A big part of him wished he could call Dennis on the spot to pontificate on what he now suspected happened in the detection chamber, but that was strictly forbidden by Midway Magnetic security policies. Jason felt like it was eating him alive that he couldn't talk to anybody about the possibly earth-shaking revelation he was considering. Eventually, the trip ended, punctuated by long periods of silence in the car. For normal couples, silence often meant there was tension, but that was almost never the case with them. This time, it was just the case of being comfortable with each other, even in silence. They made it back Sunday night in time to pick up little Jace from the home of friends who were looking out for him, and were able to make it into bed at a decent hour. Monday morning followed its normal course of events, and once again they all were off to engage in their respective professional and educational lives. While Jason never rued the time he spent with Mickey, he was tremendously looking forward to getting out of the house this particular morning so he could start testing out his theories. Once in his office, he immediately dove for the intercom button to ask Susan if Dennis had arrived yet. "No, Dr. Marsalis," she replied. "He doesn't normally make it in until 8 o'clock, sir." He glanced at his watch, suddenly remembering that in his enthusiasm to get to work, he had chosen the one secure route to work that landed him there in the shortest travel time possible. Dennis wouldn't be there for another 45 minutes. "Please let him know I need to see him as soon as he arrives," he told Susan. "Yes, sir." Jason smiled as he hung up the phone. Like Dennis, Susan was another one who seemed to enjoy being more formal at work. He decided to fire up the internet and start doing some research on string theory and quantum mechanics. He had written some papers on the subject, so had Dennis, but he wanted to center in on one particular aspect of it, the interplay between quantum mechanics and space-time. After doing quite a bit of reading on the subject, his phone intercom rang. "This is Jason." "Jason, this is Dennis. Susan said to give you a buzz when I got in." "Hey, bud, can you come here when you get a chance? I have some observations I think you might be interested in regarding the results from that test we did last week." "You mean that disaster?" quipped Dennis. "Well, maybe it wasn't such a disaster after all," said Jason rather enigmatically. "Oh, really? This I have to hear. I'll be over in a few." "Sounds good." Jason gathered together some of the materials he had been copying and pasting into a single document. He wanted to present what he was thinking in as ordered a manner as possible. After about 10 minutes, Dennis arrived. "So, what is this revelation you had?" he asked with a smile on his face. After asking, he saw Jason wasn't smiling and immediately knew this was serious. "Tell me what you remember from the test," asked Jason. "Well, after the cryogenics came up to speed and we hit min-temp, we sequentially brought the magnets up to full power," responded Dennis. "Once we did that, we injected the particle stream, waited for it to come up to max V, then fired the proton stream into the detector. And that's when all hell seemed to break loose, except for the fact that it didn't actually break loose." "And this hell that broke loose," said Jason. "Tell me exactly what you remember about the nature of that hell." "I remember 3 problems," answered Dennis. "Number 1, the detectors read back that the mass of the particle streams doubled 100 nanoseconds before the collision. Number 2, even so, the detection readings from the collision only showed an energy release matching a single collision of 2 particle streams. Third, the gamma radiation detector was dead. No radiation was read, not even 1 picocurie. Basically, all of our calorimeters and other detection equipment were totally off." "I'm not so sure," pondered Jason. "Oh?" answered a truly intrigued Dennis. At this point, Jason regaled him with the story of the weekend, omitting private events, ending with the conversation he had with Mickey about quantum mechanics. "She asked me, 'What does quantum mechanics have to do with time travel?' I told her I didn't know much about it." This earned a smile from Dennis. "But I said that I seemed to remember it had something to do with alternate dimensions and whether time is a fluid thing. I said I knew quantum mechanics had to do with trying to figure out how some particles seem to exist in 2 places at the same time." Mickey seemed intrigued at the idea, and then asked me a question which rocked my world. "And that was?" inquired Dennis. "She asked me, 'Well, what about the other way around?' I asked her what other way, and she said, 'Well, is it possible something can exist in 2 times at the same place?'" Up to this point, Dennis had been leisurely sitting forward in his chair. After hearing that particular question, he sat back and began considering the question and the implications of what the answer to it would mean in relation to the experiment last week. Gratified that Dennis was just as bowled over at the simple question as he had been, Jason continued his tale. "I was as taken back as you appear to be, and that got me thinking about what had happened." Jason paused. "Call me crazy, but I think you and I may have actually discovered how to send a particle back in time 100 nanoseconds. Those words hung in the air for quite some time until Dennis had the nerve to speak. "That would explain why the energy release was that of only the original proton streams." "Exactly," replied Jason. Again, a very pregnant pause while the 2 world-renowned physicists thought over this new revelation. "But why did it happen?" asked Dennis. "I've been thinking about that ever since the conversation with Mickey. Let me ask you something and see if you arrive at the same conclusion I did," What do you remember was different with this experiment than the others? Well, the real difference was with the detectors we were using, answered Dennis. Other than that, everything was the same. Okay, now let's break that down. What was different about those detectors? Asked Jason. Primarily, responded Dennis, it was the alloys we used in them. Those alloys had chemical reaction signatures we were looking for to detect neutrinos interacting with the subatomic plasma in the collision chamber. And the main alloy we were using utilized niobium, right? Yep, verified Dennis. So, my hypothesis is that what happened was because we were not only using a different element in the detection chamber, thus changing the magnetic signatures of the detection equipment, but also because of other variables I haven't thought of yet. I'd like to submit that if we start playing with not only the ratios of niobium alloys used, but also the magnetic power levels and laser frequencies used in the chamber, we might be able to make an even more interesting change to the results we saw. With a very big smile on his face, Dennis said, "Lead the way, sir." The next several hours were spent talking about the different things that could be done to possibly change the experiment results. After talking about all the expected effects the different changes would make, it was decided to implement them in a controlled manner, so they could measure each and every change which might or might not occur. By the end of the day, Jason and Dennis had a complete plan outlining the stages they would undertake. The next day, they started with the first stage, the easiest one, changing the laser frequencies. It didn't seem to make much difference as they stepped through a set of laser frequencies sequentially increasing in energy. After that, they started toying with the magnetic fields being used by the detection equipment. This started making a difference in how far back the doubling phenomenon occurred. Initially, they achieved a change in what they started calling the double back effect. What was originally a 100 nanosecond double back now became 200 nanoseconds, then 1 microsecond. The next change turned out to be a major turning point. They tried altering the material the matter stream interacted with. They'd been simply smashing together particle streams, which had been revolving around the particle accelerator in opposite directions. Now they tried smashing the two proton streams into a variety of various elemental materials. Nothing really significant happened until they tried lutetium. That is when all hell broke loose. As soon as the particle stream hit the lutetium, the data started fluctuating wildly. It was apparent that a chain reaction was occurring, but as with the rest of the experiments that had been happening this week, there was no radiation detected in the chamber, and while the fluctuations of the readings were wild, they were still within tolerances. It seemed to be a controlled chain reaction, but of what? What was happening in the chamber? It wasn't until Dennis switched on a video feed from the chamber that he turned white as a ghost. "Oh my God," cringed Dennis. Jason wasn't able to see the screen from his vantage point. "What is it?" "I don't know," said Dennis. "Come here. What do you make of this?" Jason immediately went over to the monitor and was quite taken back by what he saw. In the middle of the reaction chamber was what appeared to be, for the lack of a better term, a video projection of some sort. The scene looked like a still life painting of someone's living room. "What kind of radiation are you reading?" "Zero on all counters, just like all the rest of the tests," replied Dennis. After about 5 seconds, Jason quickly shot out of his seat and said, "I'm going down there to the chamber." Dennis retorted, "Not without me, you're not." The two men did their best to walk down to the detection chamber without attracting any attention. Once there, their own eyes confirmed what they didn't believe from the earlier video feed. Right there in front of them was a field, circular in shape, about 2.5 meters in diameter. In the middle of the field was what appeared to be a perfectly rendered video of the same still life painting of a living room. Walking to the other side of the chamber, the two physicists realized the field appeared to have height and width, but absolutely no depth, no thickness. The edges had a ragged nature to them and seemed to be giving off minor static electricity charges. From the other side, they saw the same scene, only in reverse. Then something stupefying happened. While silently trying to digest what they were seeing, the two men almost had heart attacks when a person in a blue sweater walked by with a bag of chips and sat on the couch in the living room. This wasn't a still life at all, but rather a live video of some sort. Jason and Dennis said the same thing at the same time. "Cut the power!" The two men dove for the emergency power cutoff switch kept in the reaction chamber, and immediately the field vanished. Both men realized they hadn't been breathing much and reluctantly gave permission to their lungs to start drawing in oxygen. As he looked over to his friend, all Dennis could say was, "I hope you found a way to thank Mickey for her question." Jason just looked at him and smiled. Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.